So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
What's your best tip for staying affectionate after 10 or more years of marriage? We want to hear from you. The number is 1-888-914-9149. Or you can go ahead and send us a message on Instagram or Twitter. We put up a post on both of those. Again, reach out. What's your best tip for staying affectionate after 10 or more years of marriage? Marijuana use in marriage and signs to look for in kids or a spouse. Stay tuned. We'll be talking about that and how to recover in just a moment. Joining me today will be Dr. Stacy Trasancos to talk about how has feminism impacted marriage, for better or worse. Two women talking about this in light of Women's History Month. We've come so far, right? We'll also talk about parenting and the impact that parenting teenagers in crisis can have on a marriage. Dr. Trasancos has her own personal story about a middle-of-the-night wake-up call her daughter gave her a couple years ago that changed their lives, and we'll talk about how that impacted their marriage. Do you have a goal with your spouse? Well, creating a common goal to work toward is something that's really great for your marriage. So we'll discuss that. And how is Kobe Bryant's wife, Vanessa, dealing after a year since Kobe Bryant died in the helicopter crash with his daughter, Gianna? That more today on Trending. The number's 1-888-914-9149. Yesterday I was talking about why you shouldn't smoke pot and perhaps why you should talk to your kids about not smoking pot if they're not already. If you didn't know, marijuana use, and actually the addiction to it, it's the third most common addiction after tobacco and alcohol. So marijuana as a addictive substance is actually higher than any other kind of drug. It's pretty incredible. Did you know that? Has marijuana impacted your marriage? Do you suspect your spouse or a child might be using it? Let's talk about some of the benefits for why people use marijuana. Anxiety, loneliness, insecurity, excessive anger, perhaps trying to tame that anger. It's a pleasurable experience. People who do pot tend to desire pleasurable experiences. It decreases the feeling of hopelessness. Why? Because you become your own God, as one friend of mine told me who spoke pot, and it's something you hear very often. When you smoke marijuana, you feel completely different, an experience outside of yourselves. And it's also used for taking away emotional and physical pain. It's used essentially, if we were to look at all of this, as a band-aid, a cover-up to treat, run from, or hide painful circumstances, situations, or behaviors. But I think one of the things that's very important for us to remember, perhaps you're someone who smoked pot, smokes it on occasion, and I talked yesterday about what the impact of smoking it just 5 times in your life is. It can radically increase your aggressive behavior. If you missed that episode, we'll post a link to it in the show notes, and we'll post it on social media now. You can find it always at relevantradio.com/trending. But if it's a comfort-seeking, pleasurable behavior, I'm always reminded, I say this quote, I hope you memorize it if you're with me regularly. Pope Emeritus Benedict once said, "The world offers you comfort. You weren't made for comfort. You were made for greatness." It's a reason why you shouldn't smoke pot. It's a reason why we shouldn't engage in a lot of addictive behaviors or bad habits. Because these things that make us comfortable don't necessarily take us beyond ourselves toward God or toward being charitable toward others. They tend to lead us to turn in on ourselves. And it's fascinating because people who smoke pot or do pot in various forms, they tend to at first to seek it as a band-aid, say for social discomfort, insecurity, loneliness. And next thing you know, it actually causes them to retreat even further away from people. What initially has been used to reduce anxiety for some can later lead to extreme social withdrawals. So let's talk about what some of those warning signs are, because I have loved ones whose marriages have fallen apart because one of the spouses was smoking marijuana. One spouse is smoking marijuana, starts to justify certain addictive behaviors, starts to justify being emotionally and mentally not present to their spouse and their family. You want to know what often happens? When you've decided to not be physically, emotionally, and mentally present to your family, cheating often is the next step. Because you've checked out, you've decided you need some sort of escape from reality. Now you're also looking for emotional and physical comfort with other people. But let's talk about what some of the signs, as warning signs that have come for parents from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. This is important because whether it's a child or perhaps a spouse, it's something to be aware of. But this one specifically with regard to your kids. Warning signs of possible marijuana use: increased aggression, irritability, loss of interest and motivation in activities that otherwise they would enjoy, spending time with peers who use marijuana. Hint, hint, that's a big one. Don't listen to your kids when they say, I'm just hanging out with them. I'm not smoking pot or doing it too. That's a big way to let them fall into the habits. We are influenced by our friends. Other signs for kids: parents be aware of smoking marijuana, worsening of already existing suicidation and mood, coming home with red eyes, huge warning sign, stealing money or perhaps having unaccounted for money. I mentioned yesterday I grew up in a generational pot smoking community, and crystal meth, heroin, Oxycontin, a number of other drugs were major problems because marijuana was the gateway. And this unaccounted for money was a big one. People were not only selling but growing marijuana in their own ways, in their own backyards, in their own homes. Another warning sign is carrying a lighter or a roller paper. Come on, how much more, obvious can we get here with some of these things? Additional signs to watch for as parents and as a spouse from doctor and psychiatrist Rick Fitzgibbons. He says this: perhaps mistrust of parents or spouse, where this person where you suspect suddenly they're not trusting you because they tend to become schizophrenic. Explosive anger out of nowhere. Isn't that interesting? Because they tend to say that people try to use marijuana to treat anger, but then it can lead to greater anger issues. False accusation, pervasive irresponsibility. Work or employment is suddenly or continues to be far below one's ability. This is different from having a hard time getting a promotion. This is when they become lazy, stuck where they're at. In other words, apathetic. Apathy is a huge sign in individuals who are smoking marijuana. Paranoid thoughts, difficulty in maintaining friendships. Isn't that sad? A lot of people start doing drugs, smoking pot, drinking because they want to have deeper relationships and interaction with others. But then next thing you know, it leads them to be apathetic, uncommittal, and actually breaks down the very thing they desire so much. It's important to remind teenagers of this. A couple other things: failure to consider reasonable plans for the future. So they have no vision, they have no goal. And excessive time in solitary activities such as video gaming, especially violent video gaming. But let's get to some of the alternatives. So maybe you have a spouse or a child who is doing pot, or you might be suspect of it. Here are some recommendations for people who are really seeking pot as an escape. Perhaps there's something they are trying to escape from because of a broken heart or situation where maybe there's forgiveness necessary or healing that's necessary, trauma therapy, forgiveness therapy. This is where we recommend CatholicTherapist.com. Helping to build true, lasting, strong friendships, especially for teenagers, but also for spouses to have good, strong friendships with people of the same sex. Women need good female friends, and men need good male friends. Those friends who will call you out to help draw you back into your responsibilities, your love for those in your family. Volunteering and giving things away is important because it's often shown in studies that people who do pot tend to be kind of selfish individuals. They turn in on themselves. And so volunteering and giving things away are a couple of ways to start to go outside of yourself, to choose other things and people beyond yourself. And many people who are counselors, both Catholic counselors and therapists, as well as priests, recommend working on growing in virtue to address the emotional discontinuity that tends to occur, especially the desire for pleasure, selfishness, or self-obsession, humility, generosity, all of these things that take us outside of ourselves. But parents, listen to this. This is really important. In 2018, the Harvard School of Public Health did a study. And what they did is when they were looking at various issues, they saw that for people, specifically children, who grew up with a faith life, and not just a faith life, but a prayer life, this significantly decreased use of marijuana in adulthood. So if a kid grows up not just with faith, but with prayer, they're less likely to turn to marijuana as an escape. The same can be said for spouses. Do you pray with your spouse? Is prayer understood as a recourse for crisis, for loneliness, for pain, anger, anxiety? Prayer changes things. If you take nothing away from this conversation about how the signs of marijuana use, whether for a spouse or a child, remember that prayer decreases the use of marijuana in adulthood. Recommended ways for recovery, check out CatholicTherapist.com and their countless Catholic-based addiction treatment centers and programs, the 12-step program. We'll post out some links on social media now, especially just one example is St. Gregory Centers for Addiction Recovery. I want to encourage you to share your thoughts with us. The best tips for staying affectionate after 10 plus years of marriage. Send them our way. We'd love to hear from you. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. My guest now is Dr. Stacy Trasancos. She's been filling in for me while I've been away on maternity leave. And she is back during our marriage hour today. It is Women's History Month. And I want to talk about feminism, specifically, Dr. Trasancos, how feminism has impacted marriages for better or worse. Welcome to Trending.
Hello, Timmerie. It's so good to be back with you.
Oh, it's a joy to have you. Let's talk a little bit about feminism. You know, we have so many so-called views of feminism. Today, it tends to be that a lot of people who believe in traditional mindsets have abandoned the word feminist, because feminist today tends to mean you're pro-abortion, pro-contraception, and you don't really believe in differences between men and women. But then there are people who really want to continue to hold on to that word because, like you and I, we're pro-woman. And we want to hear and see that other people are pro-woman too. So there's a lot of confusion sometimes around the words. We're not just knocking feminists if you take yourself to be one. We are against a type of feminism that stands for abortion, contraception, and saying there are no differences between men and women. So before we kind of move forward, I wanted to get that on the table because I know sometimes people say, well, hold on, I'm a feminist. So what do you think? Has feminism impacted marriages for better or worse? And what are some of the things that you've noticed in your own life?
I think that feminism has, it's created differences where really none should exist. It's given, like you're saying, Timmerie, if you ask a young woman going into a marriage who's a feminist, what she thinks that means, she thinks that means that there needs to be some kind of equality because she's a victim of the patriarchy in our society that came from capitalism. And she's going to go into marriage kind of with a chip on her shoulder that maybe she doesn't actually have, but society told her she needed to have. And she starts out with this suspicion of her husband, not thinking that she's equal. And, you know, I find it funny that if you really want to know, I find it refreshing, not funny, but I guess in a weird kind of funny way. If you really want to know what equality in marriage means, go read the catechism. Because that's what the church teaches, true equality in marriage, where you're both leading each other to heaven and respecting each other's individual differences, where your gender is only part of that.
You know, Stacy, it's interesting as you talk about that, because I think in order to even start to grasp how feminism has impacted marriages, the suffragettes, the original first wave feminists, there was a lot of controversy that ended up occurring as the feminist movement developed. And there were a lot of feminists and anti-feminists. And the feminists eventually ended up ignoring, in part, the woman's nature, the maternal dimension of a woman's nature. And then the anti-feminists went too far in the other direction by saying women can only be mothers and housekeepers. And I think that this led to a lot of confusion going into marriage, like you were just talking about, because there are different attitudes that have now, I think, influenced even to today, and in a time where we believe we're so-called equal or unequal, as some people believe as well, where they think, well, I have to be one or the other. I have to be 100% perfect housewife, housekeeper, 100% mother, or on the other side, I am in the workforce, I have mommy guilt, but I am 100% in, and this is what I'm doing, and I'm digging my feet in. And then there are people who also say, I have it all. I'm doing all of it at once, and they make it sound like they're doing it perfectly, but then they're totally stressed out and overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the check the box syndrome. And it applies to a lot of other things like you're mentioning about perfect mommyhood and perfect wifehood. And we have this idea, I mean, I think at the fundamental root of it is this scientism we've got throughout the society that we just tend to look at people as objects instead of human persons. But people have this idea if you just check the boxes, then you'll be the perfect whatever it is you're trying to be. And the truth is there's no magic formula for any of that. If you look at your husband and say, you're a man, but you're also all these other things, let's work together. And you solve your own problems and forge your own path. And anytime there's some preconceived idea of what perfection looks like, it's a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. That's Dr. Stacy Trasancos here with me today. Dr. Trasancos, something that stood out to me over the last few years is there's been this approach in the culture where women really don't get men anymore. They don't. Women teachers are kind of holding to the zero tolerance policy and punishing little boys for having a little more active or aggressive behavior or for drawing pictures of guns and swords. Women in marriages are having a hard time understanding why their husbands just don't think the way they think and do things the way they do them. And I think this is a problem of this equality movement that says there are no differences between men and women, because then it puts incredible strain on marriages when we don't understand that men and women function differently in addition to individual personalities.
Mm-hmm. And when two become one, you're creating something. It's really beautiful, and it's a shame that people get roped into these preconceived ideas of perfection that don't work. And the most beautiful thing about marriage is that the two of you come together, and you don't. It's like Trinitarian. You don't stop being who you are, even as you merge together in communion and create this whole new thing called your marriage. And one of the best things ever, and I mean, we've been married for 18 years, so it took us a long time to realize this, but the day we realized, hey, we're working towards something, we're building something together, it allowed us to see each other as the unique human beings that we are, respecting male and female, but also respecting and loving all the other things about us that make us equal but different.
Mm. Another thing I think that was lost when you're talking about kind of this respect and awareness and working toward things together is I've noticed that men, no matter what their political, no matter what their religious viewpoints are in life, they have a tremendous amount of respect for mothers. Mm-hmm. I think it's this love that's deep down inside in all men for their own mother. And when they see a mother, they appreciate them. There's the respect that's present there. And I think that one of the damages done by the radical feminist movement is that it's actually led to a disrespect from men toward women because women don't want to be mothers anymore. And so there's been this decline in the love for motherhood, there's this decline in the appreciation of what women are. And I think this is a huge reason why so many men are checking out of wanting to get married or even dating.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Timmerie. I think there's a lot to that. I think you're exactly right. It's got me thinking about my 10-year-old son, making sure that he has a good relationship with me so that he finds a woman who treats him well. the same way. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense that a man would want a woman who wants to hold him, who wants to nurture him, and, you know, who loves him and wants him for who he is. I mean, that's the greatest thing in the world, to be wanted for who you are, to be loved for who you are. It's so scary thinking people might not love you if they know who you are, you know. And how wonderful for a man to know that he's got that love from his woman. Even if things don't go right, you know, in marriage, things don't always go well. We don't always all make the best choices. And it's really powerful when you can lead the other person to do the right thing, but not in a condemning or critical way, but in a like, hey, I know you, I get you, let's figure this out together, you know?
Yeah, you know, another challenge, and Karen was just bringing this up, that men are really, I think, being confused about how they're supposed to treat women. And this is so true, and I've run into this struggle even in the workforce before, where men are taught from an early age to treat girls as equal, and some men are taught to treat girls respectfully, but then you're in the workforce and suddenly there's this competition between men and women. In that competition, you either don't go for the competition against someone of the opposite sex, or you do. I think it creates a lot of confusion for men. What are your thoughts with regard to raising a son and how that could impact him as he moves forward in school and career?
Oh, one of the sweetest things with my 25-year-old son is that he saw my husband buy me gifts, right? Like roses. Like I said, I wanted popcorn one time, and he came home with a 50-pound bag. Like, I have to be careful what I ask for because he'll shower it on me. But my son, he sends me presents for every occasion now, and they're the most thoughtful little gifts. And I know he learned that by watching, you know, my husband do it, and like opening doors. My 10-year-old understands that he should open doors for girls, and because he sees his dad do it. And I think they want to treat women right. They want to do that, you know, and it can be a really beautiful thing.
Amen. And it's a reminder for fathers, how you treat your wife, how you treat your daughters will set the example for how men will be taught to treat women in the culture when they are told, don't treat women differently, treat them equally. Don't show any special treatment toward women. But the reality is we're different, we're unique, and there is an honor that is meant to be shown from men toward women. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. I'll be right back. Do you ever think about what the consequence will be for doing the right thing? Maybe you don't like the consequence, so you just don't do it. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. Friday, therapist and addiction specialist Sister Tina Alfieri joins me to discuss breaking bad habits and building good ones this Lent. So join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forester.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back to our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. We'd like to hear from the pros in marriage. If you've been married 10 years or longer, give us a call or write to us on social media. What's your best tip for staying affectionate after 10 years of marriage? One of the things that came in on social media, someone said, plan to share new experiences and adventures. For example, road trips, going on walks or hikes if you're more adventurous, puzzles even. Take a dance class, as Karen just said. She said her in-laws took a disco in the 70s, so now she's going for some salsa. They've signed up for 6 lessons. She'll be salsaing during the family rosary. Just stay tuned for little salsa moves behind the scenes. But let us know, what's your tip for staying affectionate after 10 years of marriage? A couple responses we've had on Instagram. You can write to me on my Instagram story as well at Timmerie, that's Timmerie. Our mutual love for God, keeping ourselves healthy, and mutual chemistry. But the big thing is keeping ourselves both healthy. That means trying to make sure you look good too, getting dressed. You know, the joke is Put on the lipstick. Do your hair every day. I could learn a lot about this week because I'm moving, new baby, no makeup. It happens, but it's a good reminder to get ready and to look nice for your spouse. Cut your hair, gentlemen. Keep the beard, or preferably no beard, nice and groomed. Put on some cologne. Get the deodorant working, even if it's that natural deodorant we were talking about earlier in the week here on Trending. But with me today is Dr. Stacy Trasancos, and marriages can be deeply impacted by parenting, especially those teenage years or crisis moments. And Dr. Stacy Trasancos a couple years ago had her daughter wake her up in the middle of the night to share something that radically changed their lives. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your story, your daughter's, but really how you and your husband navigated through the challenge and the challenges of raising teenagers.
Oh boy, I could write a book on that. We just kept going. It was definitely hard. I mean, my daughter called me. We had a lot of issues leading up to it, but she called me when I was actually at Steubenville the night before the Defending the Faith conference. I was supposed to give a talk on parenting, and my daughter calls me at 3 a.m. and tells me that she's pregnant. And the first thing out of my mouth was, "You've got to love this baby unconditionally, starting right now, just like we love you unconditionally, and we'll figure this out. And you just let that love lead the way." And she has. But it required that from all of us. I mean, my husband and I were terrified. We didn't know what was going to happen. There was honestly a period of time where we were blaming each other. We both felt like we had failed. The other kids had issues because it just rocked the whole family. And so there were days, the way I put it to people is, for about a whole year, I just felt like somebody was holding me underwater. And I couldn't come up for breath. Like, I might get 5 minutes of peace here and there. And there were times when I would start to panic because I needed to come up for air. And I couldn't. But, it's in the past now. We got through it. And that baby just turned a year old. My daughter's doing great. She graduated high school a year early because she wanted to take care of her baby. And, life goes on.
Praise God. Winston Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Yeah, keep going. And that's right.
It's a good reminder, especially when it comes to marriages. I like where you shared, here this is 3 a.m. Your 15-year-old daughter tells you she's pregnant. And the irony of it, you're giving a talk at Steubenville on parenting. Yeah. But the highlight, I think, of that entire thing is where you said both you and your husband were blaming each other. How did you guys get through that? What was that journey like?
It really, I'm saying this from the other side right now because there were days when I didn't know if we were going to stay together. Like, I didn't know. It forced us to take a look at everything we thought we knew yet again. I mean, I've been parenting for 31 years. I still don't feel like I know how to do it well. Except to say you just keep going and you love your kids for who they are. They're all so different. But we looked at each other and we said, we're going to get each other through this. We're going to help each other figure out what the right thing is to do. And you can trust me to have your best interests at heart, and I can trust you to have my best interests at heart. And we actually had to go to therapy, and it got to that point. That was the line that changed everything. It's like the therapist said, "Do you believe he has your best interests at heart?" And when I was able to say yes, and he was able to say the same of me, we just kind of held hands and just kept walking forward.
Praise God. There's the book, Impossible Marriages Redeemed by Layla Miller.
Yes.
And it's such a profound story because it's literally talking about marriages that were on the brink of divorce, whether it was infidelity, crisis with children, whether it was addiction. It's incredible to hear the stories, and when you truly believe in the sacrament of matrimony, that your spouse does have your best interest in mind, and that you have to come back together to work your way toward that, it makes a difference. And that's so important to remember. Dr. Trasancos, I want to kind of turn it a little bit, though, as we're talking about this, because this is difficult for a lot of parents today. You raise your kids right. They're in a good home. They have faith. Next thing you know, there are crisis moments, the sexual perversity of the culture, the exploitation of young girls. We can't say that even good girls and good families are safe today. They are so heavily impacted by body image, social media, and the fact that they are constantly told they have to look hot and available all the time. What's the answer to raising a kid? And I mean, you've been in the middle of this happening and it going the wrong way. Praise God, there's a baby and you're loving that baby. But how do we help our girls today?
You have to help. I mean, I have 4 teenage girls right now, right? And anybody who's ever heard me talk, they're all 13, 14, 16, and 17. And you, I know, like, I didn't think it could be done. And I didn't realize when I was having all those, but I was like, I'm open to life. Woohoo. Well, this is open to life 2.0.
What did I do? Adoption is an option. We tell people that, right?
Yes. No, it's called a she shack. I literally am building a she shack in the backyard where I go hide. But I have to help each of these girls be who they're supposed to be. I have to help them. And, you know, when you raise truth seekers, you are going to have rebellion because they're going to think they're seeking truth and they know the truth and they won't believe that you do. And you kind of have to let them go through that without letting them get hurt. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's really wonderful watching them flourish into the young women that they're supposed to be. It's scary. It's terrifying. But you know, they know. A psychiatrist explained it to me one time. When they're babies, you're sitting on the bench at the park holding them, and as they grow up and start toddling away, they go a few steps away from you and they come back. They want to be held. Mommy, pick me up. As they get older, they wander off further and further. But even when they're grown, they want to be able to look back and see you still sitting there. Like, I'm here if you need me. You go out and do your thing, but you can always come back to me and sit in my lap, and I'll hold you. And I have a 31-year-old daughter, and we had some rocky years, and, you know, that we're great friends now. And so it really changed when I stopped trying to control her to be, you know, when I say don't check the boxes for perfection, it's because I did that for so long, and it hurt my kids. They just become who they're meant to be, and you're supposed to help them do that.
And that's hard. Perfectionism, the expectation of perfectionism, that's a big thing that millennials down to Gen Z are saying it's eating them alive. I mean, they are so stressed, anxious, and even depressed and lonely because they're isolating in order to achieve this level of perfectionism and grades. Perfectionism in school clubs, being school president, or being the person with the most extracurricular activities or service hours. Dr. Trasancos, what would you recommend is the thing or things that people try to cut out of their kids' lives, and then on the opposite side, add into their kids' lives to help them from this culture that is telling, especially girls, be hot, be available, be sexually active at such a young age?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, social media is a big black box. You can't always know what's going on there. But it's really powerful that my girls are all very close to their dad. I mean, that is something I am so thankful for because he treats them well. They are close to him. They know he's got their back, and I see it really happening. They don't pick, ultimately they pick friends who are good for them. They you know, obviously don't always 100% of the time. But in the end, they learn to make good choices about who they let into their life. I talk to them a lot about boundaries. You've got to learn how to put up your fence and say, I let the good in, I keep the bad out. And if you want to be my friend, if you want to be in my life, you've got to treat me with respect. And, you know, they're going to make mistakes. So really just being able to listen to your teen, being able to keep your face muscles relaxed and not freak out when they tell you things that scare you to death. And try to see the world through their eyes. I know that sounds cliche, but you really, really do have to try to look at it through their eyes because they will panic about a look, a glance, a one word. They'll think their world's falling apart, and you won't get it, but you've got to try to understand to them their world really is falling apart sometimes for things that seem insignificant to us as adults.
Mm-hmm. Looking back in hindsight, it's hard. And so many people of faith, their kids are sexually active at such a young age, and it's so hard for parents. And, the question is, well, I taught them theology of the body. I sent them to youth group. I've done all of these different things. And you go back and you go, what could I have done more? Or what could have changed? In hindsight, looking back, what would you have done differently? What are you really glad that you did do?
Ooh, wait, that's a big one. With my daughter that made that bad choice, I think there was I think I protected him so much because I wasn't always Catholic. So when this second crop of kids came along, because I already had two, I said, I'm not going to make those same mistakes. I'm going to raise these kids and they go to Mass every Sunday. They have their entire lives. And, still, I think my daughter let people take advantage of her. She was trying too hard to please. There's a lot there, but she just lost control.
Yeah,
yes,
that pressure to please, in order to be friends, in order to feel loved, that pressure, and it starts. And this is where the first thing you mentioned earlier, social media, the psychological impact of always having to have affirmation through a like, through a comment, through glances based on what you're wearing, how you look. It is conditioning women to do anything they can for some sort of affirmation, whether online, in a text message, through sexting, through interactions with people in a dating relationship or friendship. That pressure is so intense. And I don't think anyone at this point in the culture is safe from that pressure, even if you have a faith, even if you so-called know better. These choices are so hard to make.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of bullying that goes on online, and it's heartbreaking. Your kid tells you I'm being bullied, and you're never quite sure what to make of it. But you want to get in there and protect them, and it's just they learn to block people. It's that boundaries thing. They learn how to block people. They learn how to protect themselves, and I'm always struggling with social media, with electronics in general, because I want them to learn how to use them as tools, but I don't want it to go too far. And so it is like walking on the edge of a razor daily, trying to make sure that you're walking that fine line, that you're not going too far in helicopter parenting and you're not going too far the other way and being too permissive. Mm-hmm. So teaching them. But it's working. Stick with what the church teaches. Just keep falling back on the catechism and your kids have questions.
That's Dr. Trasancos here during our marriage hour. She will be back with us regularly here on Trending. I'll be right back, but if you would like to share your wisdom, if you have 10 or more years of marriage, what do you do to keep affection alive within your marriage? Write us on social media or give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149. You can find me on Instagram. Just head over to relevantradio.com/trending during the break to share your wisdom.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
What's your best tip for staying affectionate after 10 years of marriage? We want to hear from you. Give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149 or reach out on social media. We will share it on air. You can find me at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. I love this one because I think it's so simple, but it's so Catholic. This came in just now. Treat marriage as a long-term commitment. Why? Because when you think of marriage as a long-term commitment, and you think about marriage and dating in the beginning, and you think about, what wooed you, what brought you together, well, how do you keep that alive for 20 years, for 30 years, for 50 years moving forward? Remember, it's a long-term commitment, but remember the beginning. The beginning of your marriage, it's so important. And the love and the affection and the gentleness and tenderness that was present, that should never go away. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Coming up, I'll talk about the widow of Kobe Bryant, that is Vanessa Bryant, and the 3 living children that he left behind. He was in a tragic helicopter crash last year. Wow, I can't believe it's been a year. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes here during our marriage hour. So there is one tip that people often share. I saw it on hacks.com, lifehacks.com. I've heard people say it over and over again. You want a good marriage? Create a common goal and work toward it together. And it's important, though, to not only have that goal, but how do you make a goal? I think this brings up a really good question. Because I was reading a testimony from a gentleman named Jeff. He's been married over 28 years. And he was talking about how he thinks the secret that helped he and his wife and keep their love alive and their affection alive for years was that they always had a common goal they were working toward together. And he said their goals would change throughout their marriage, but they were always working on it together. And they're still in love 33 years later, 28 years of marriage. They met, how did they meet? In a wedding party for mutual friends. But what he said about having a goal, I think is so important. So let's talk about setting goals. Because goals, it's one thing to say, okay, I want a new job. It's another thing to say, I want to save money to buy a new house. It's another thing to say, I want to have children. But if you're not doing things to make that happen, well, it won't happen. And it's fascinating to me because often people will pray for something and they'll share with me, well, I'm praying for this to happen in my life. I say, okay, well, what are you also doing in your life to work with God to make it happen? Because God will help you, but you know, the common saying, God helps those who help themselves. You have to work toward that very thing which you are praying for. Whether it's this Lent, you are praying to become a gentler or more patient person. Well, it's one thing to pray for the virtues. It's another thing to also work on behavior modification. It's another thing to take yourself out of situations that make you impatient. It's important to put yourself, if you're working on patience, in situations with people who really try your patience and pray and bite your tongue and push your heels into the ground. Do what you have to do. Take a breath. Walk away for a few minutes. So let's talk. Have you ever heard of SMART goal setting? Well, we can do SMART goal setting for marriage. And SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-centered goals. So when we set a goal, we need it to be specific. There's that joke where there were people who were, and it might even be a true story. I don't know if it's a true story, but there's a story that I've heard, you may have heard it before as well, where a group of people were having a nativity scene and they needed a donkey for the nativity scene. And I'm not talking about a living donkey. They just needed the donkey piece for the nativity scene. Well, they start praying and praying for a donkey for the nativity scene, and they end up getting a living, breathing donkey. That wasn't what they were looking for. It wasn't exactly what they wanted, but their prayer was answered. And so I think that it's a good reminder that we need to be specific sometimes. Yes, leave this sense of abandonment to God, but we actually need to know what what we're working toward, especially to be on the same page in marriage. So if you're working toward a goal, make it specific that both you and your spouse know and agree upon. Make it something that's measurable. When's the deadline? A year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And what specific steps do you maybe have along the way that you need to achieve in order to get there? Number 3, your goal should be something that's actually achievable for you and your spouse. Some people have the common goal that they really want to be millionaires. They want to get rich. I'm not saying this is a bad goal, but it is also important to work your way toward what really does make sense. If, say, you want to have X so much money in the bank, not just the broad goal of saying, I want to be a millionaire. It has to be realistic, kind of touches on the same thing. And finally, you have to have this time mapped out. I'll give an example. Many people say, well, I want a new job, so that one of the spouses, say, can work part-time and be more present to the kids. Or say so that one of the spouses can provide for the family. And so you're working toward a new job. Well, you have to be on the same page. What kind of job? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? What needs to happen in order to make your way to getting there? A really simple goal could be maybe you want to take back up a habit that you used to have. Maybe it was playing the guitar, taking ballet classes. How can you and your spouse get together on that goal for the good of your marriage? You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Maria's calling us from Los Angeles. She's been married for 34 years, and she wants to share with us. Oh, she just dropped. I'll share her tip, though, that she was sharing. A little bit of what she shared with us is communication between the spouses is so important in order to keep affection alive in a marriage. If you're able to communicate, if you're able to talk, in other words, be on the same page, it does help for affection to stay very present. Elisa from California is calling as well. She's asking about Scientology and atheism. We can't take your call right now. I'd love to. We only have a few minutes left here. But we have another question coming in from Blake about essentially social media and being grateful. Let's go ahead and take Blake. Oh, he's dropped. You guys are dropping like flies. What are you doing? Getting rid of my callers here, Patrick? Okay. Well, we have had so many tips come in that we are loving this. We'll have to share more of the tips that have come in next week. But I want to share now a little bit about what's happening in Southern California. Vanessa Bryant is the widow of Kobe Bryant, the tragic helicopter accident that occurred last year, taking the life of him and his daughter Gianna. Catholic, by the way. And they are survived by his wife, Vanessa, and their daughters, Natalia, Bianca, and I think it's Capper. I'm not really sure how they say that name. But she was talking in her comments, reflecting a year later. She talks about how the pain has been unimaginable. I can't even imagine having lost a child. But she said, getting out of bed and pushing forward is going to make the day better for my girls and for me. So that's what I do. And she also talks about how as she's struggling with the heartbreak and the grief from the loss, she said, you have to find a reason to live. And I think this is so important as we're talking about setting a goal. She said, I know it's hard, but she said she looks at her daughters and she tries to push forward through feeling that for them, feeling what they're going through. She said, death is guaranteed, but living the rest of the day isn't. So she said, find your reason. Find your reason to live. And I think this is really important from someone who lost her husband, lost one of her children at a very young age. She recognizes that even now in her marriage, she has to have a goal in mind. To honor her husband who's deceased, to honor and love her children today, a goal has to be present. And I imagine that she looks back and thinks about all the goals that her and her husband had for their family, for his career, for his businesses. In fact, in the testimony, she starts about how she's been working on his nonprofit programs and how she's been working on various programs for his business as well. And taking care of their children. They had a common mission and a common vision. This is so important. Because that has helped her to move on with how to love her family and honor her husband, even in the face of his death and his presence no longer here on earth with her. And so it asks us this question: what goals do we have in our marriage? You know, it's easy, I think, during the earlier years. I want to buy a house. I want to have a baby. I want to have this type of career. But what are those bigger goals? Maybe that we can think about this Lent. That perhaps you want to instill in your child the virtue of patience, the virtue of faith. You want to have the goal that your child is going to have a profound prayer life that you have helped them to develop. You know, that was one thing that really stood out to me in that study that I was mentioning earlier when we were talking about marijuana. That the study showed that kids who not only had faith but developed a prayer life when they were younger were less likely to use and abuse marijuana in adulthood. Prayer changes things. Prayer is the answer and the healing balm that so many people are looking for. And prayer is what helps us get through the worst of the worst situations and helps children rely on God, trust on Him, and hope in Him and the life and the world to come. Join me tomorrow with therapist and addiction specialist Sister Tina Alfieri here on Trending. Do you ever think about what the consequence will be for doing the right thing? Maybe you don't like the consequence, so you just don't do it. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. Friday, therapist and addiction specialist Sister Tina Alfieri joins me to discuss breaking bad habits and building good ones this Lent. So join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.